Good afternoon. I was about to say good morning, good afternoon. I think we have just tripped over yes, we have just tripped into midday. I'm absolutely delighted that there's people standing as well. That makes me feel incredibly special. Thank you. I'm hoping today, as per what the title of this particular talk is, to give you an introduction to advocacy. Someone asked me this morning when I was standing at the Inns of Court College of Advocacy ICA stall what the most important thing was that I thought they should do. They're in their second year at university, thinking of applying to the ICCA in their third year, and indeed for pupillage. And I said, focus on your advocacy, because that, I know from our students at the ICCA, is in many ways the driving force for them. They want to become advocates. I usually have an hour for this talk. I've got half an hour today, so I'll do what I can. I always struggle to do what I can within an hour, let alone within half an hour. And I have to say to organisers, I won't think it's rude when you tell me to keep stumm, stop talking. So I will try and get through what I can to help you. We're going to be looking at a number of things today. I'm assisted by slides in order to guide this. Some things that people think are really boring about, like preparation, having to do the work, but is an important thing. I'll go into those. Really, some of the key techniques of persuasion that make a huge difference to your impact as advocates, and simple matters such as how to close down, how to actually stop talking in the most effective way. In many ways, the focus of advocacy, which of course really good advocacy is the technique of persuasion, both in writing and of course orally. As many practicing barristers will tell you, as effective as you are or you may be in terms of your presentation in the courtroom, you can only be as effective as the amount of work you have put into preparing your case in advance. Dinah Rose, KC, a titan amongst advocates, says you need to know your case intimately and entirely. That's exactly what she said to ICA students when she came to address us and talking about some of the really interesting cases that she's been involved in. But it's not just Dinah Rose KC that would say that, it's any KC that would say that, and any practicing barrister, including myself, that would say that. You've got to get involved, you've got to read through your case, not once, but multiple times. Some people have techniques where they write it all out because it's good at embedding it into their minds, but really get to know the facts of your particular case, and then, of course, look at the law. And if you're in a moot, of course, if you're appealing, you're seeking to undermine the judgment of the court below, and if you're for the respondent, you're seeking to affirm, to support the judgment of the court below. But you've got to look. There will always be some key issues, and sometimes just one key issue, and it's really focusing down on that. And then the more work you put into your preparation, the less concern you're going to have about being asked questions. When you're preparing your case, it's really important to think not just about the parts that really work with you, that support your case, but actually, what are the weaknesses in your argument? Because I can promise you there will be, certainly if it's a good moot problem, for example, but in reality too. There will be weaknesses in your case, and acknowledging those weaknesses, and then thinking to yourself, how can I turn them round? How can I turn them into something that actually goes to support my overall argument? So, know your case, know your documents, know your law. A lot of people find it very useful as a method of preparation to create a chronology as they go through the facts and just expand that as they go along. It's a useful note to look at as you move on. I've got here, in terms of presentation, we're going to look at a few aspects of presentation, but simplicity it's very easy to think that barristers speak in a complex way. Good barristers don't actually speak in a complex way. They use simple language, plain speaking. The overall effect of what they do may appear complex, but actually it's made up of simple parts. So don't feel you've got to use what I might term flowery language. Plain speaking is a good thing. Many people, when they start off as advocates, speak far too quickly. Just think about that. I used to write down on a piece of paper, slow down. It wasn't for anyone else other than me, but I knew, particularly with nerves, that they used to drive me on. I used to think, oh, do you know what, if I get through this as quickly as possible, that's going to be a good thing. Of course it's not a good thing, because actually it really interferes with the listener, the audience's ability to follow what you're saying. So slow down, moderate pace. But when you're thinking about your case, keep it as simple as possible. Lady Justice Andrews puts it beautifully here. How would you explain to a friend who gets easily bored why you should win? Yeah? And if you can do that, that's a really, really good thing. So, and you should be able to do that. You should have that argument in your head when you go into the courtroom. Stick to the issues, focus on your best points, acknowledge weaknesses. I say focus on your best points because particularly if you go into moots, I can promise you, if you're new to mooting, you will think, oh, do you know what, I've got potentially 6 arguments. I know I've only got 12 minutes to present them, but I've got 6 arguments. That's great. And they must all be great because there are potentially 6 arguments, so I'm going to use all of them. What does that mean? It means you're going to be going too quickly. It means, actually, if you'd taken the time to analyse them, you'd have probably realised I could probably discard several of those because they're not that great. And I can promise you, for those of you that do go into practice in due course, a phrase you'll hear from a judge will be, what's your best point? Yeah, don't look so surprised. It will happen, I promise you, okay? Very often, you might have set your arguments out 1, 2, 3, and the judge will say, actually, can you start with argument 3? Because I think that's your strongest argument. Don't think it works by building up to your strongest argument. Far better, turn that round, start with your strongest argument, okay? Start with the most attractive argument that you have. I talked about pace. There's multiple things here because it's a short talk. But I spoke about pace. Just something about pace. We all know if we go far too quickly, we are liable to trip over our own words. It's just something that people do. Some people are very good at speaking quickly, but most people, frankly, aren't. If you're going too quickly, essentially your mouth is ahead of your thinking mind. It doesn't give you the opportunity to take time to consider how you're actually, or what question you might ask if it's witness handling, or how you might actually articulate a point most effectively. If you switch that round, and actually your brain is ahead of your mouth, you're giving yourself time to think. Silence actually is a good thing. If a judge asks you a question, to pause, when you pause, you don't have to fill it with fillers, ums and ahs. Can you just give me a moment to think about that? You can just stop and think. And it'll be obvious by the way you're looking. You're giving it some time to think. That's a good thing. You're a thinking advocate. And actually, everyone needs space. Space and silence in that sense. It's the same as looking at a document that hasn't got too many words on it, that's got margins. That's actually got paragraphs, it's got white space on it. It allows some peace just in terms of the attractiveness of the document. And think of oral advocacy in the same way. Breaking it down and having some silence and natural gaps is actually really attractive to the listener and gives the listener, similarly, the ability to take on board what you're saying. Practice, practice, practice. We say to students, film yourself. A lot of people think, no, I don't like to listen to my own voice. I don't like to see myself. But actually, it's a wonderful way of revealing what isn't working well. Okay? So take time to do that. Most of you will have iPhones or similar. I know there are other models available. Use them, yeah? And look at yourself. And practice. Practice, practice, practice. It really, really works. Volume. I don't have a problem with volume. People tell me that far too often. However, what you don't want is to be whispering. And it's very easy when you first start off to whisper. Or, alternatively, just to go far too far the other way. And it makes it really difficult to actually... I say to people, I judge a lot of moods. I have to say to people, I'm sorry, could you just drop the volume a little bit? I think they must just think I've got to a certain age and I can't hear anymore, but there we are, okay? So just be careful about that. Again, practice, practice, practice. I've spoken already about choosing your best arguments. Really important in terms of giving you time to address the court, and really important in terms of your ability to present as effectively as you can. And when you've got your 12 minutes or 13 minutes or whatever the moot rules are for the moot that you're doing, take into account in terms of when you practice that probably a couple of minutes of your time will be used for answering judges' questions. Because, and I'll be dealing with answering questions in a moment, but part of the criteria for the judge in assessing your performance will be how you approach answering questions. So they have to ask you questions, however irritating you might find it. And I'll be dealing with that concept of defensiveness and irritation. We've all felt it at one particular stage. Okay. Simplicity, again, I keep talking about simplicity. Keep it as simple as possible. Not just for yourself, but it's so helpful for the audience, so helpful for the judge. As Lord Panic says, you cannot persuade a judge if she does not understand what you're talking about. I'm not getting paid for this, by the way, but if you want to read a really good book on advocacy, Lord Panic's Hamlin lectures last year, it's just called Advocacy, costs £20, quite a lot of money, but if you're at university, get the librarian to get a copy in. But I really recommend it. It's also really amusing. It's got some wonderful anecdotes in it, but it's got some fabulous advice in it for any budding advocate. Okay, scripts. Let's talk about scripts, okay? It's very easy. When you go into court, you've done your skeleton argument, and then you think, okay, how am I going to add some flesh to the bones of this skeleton argument to actually write it all out? And you've written it all out, and you think, oh, do you know what, that's really good. And then you go along with your piece of paper, or it might be your iPad, it might even be your phone. Phone's worse than a piece of paper, by the way, because it just looks like you're texting. But I can imagine. And there you are, and you start reading it out. And if you start reading it out, this is what you're doing. So you're not engaging with your audience, there's no eye contact. And most people actually don't read that well. They don't do what a radio presenter would call allowing their words to lift off the page, as if they're not reading. And what a lot of people do, because they realise when they read, usually the pace is a bit out, it sounds a bit monotone, it sounds a bit quick. So what they start doing is they start adding false intonation, and usually in the wrong place to make it sound like they're not reading, even though it's really obvious that they are, and actually the whole thing falls apart. And then, so I would say to a student, why are you reading in the first place? This is actually about advocacy, it's about connection, it's about engagement with your audience. Oh well, they would say, this is a generalisation, but it's mainly true. Because I was just really concerned that if I went into the moot courtroom or wherever it might be, I would forget everything that I was going to say. So it's a safety net in reality. And I would say, okay, so let's imagine right now that I said, dump the papers, dump your bag, let's go outside and let's have a cup of coffee. And let's imagine we were sitting there having that cup of coffee. And I said to you, what's this case all about? What are your best points? What are your arguments? You'd be able to tell me, wouldn't you? Yeah, of course I would. I said, exactly. So you'd be able to tell me over a cup of coffee. You've put probably a day's work into this. You've worked through your arguments. You've done your preparation. You've done your analysis. You've gone through your law. You've read multiple cases. And part of you, the little devil sitting on your shoulder, said, yeah, but you're going to forget everything when you go into court. That's not going to happen, is it, in reality? Because that safety net, if you take in that script, actually, you're always going to use it. It makes it impossible. If a judge says, for example, oh, well, I don't want to hear your first argument, Mr. Kessling, I actually find your third argument, according to the skeleton argument, far more attractive. Can you start with that? Then I'm looking down thinking, oh, but that doesn't really work with my script. How can I be flexible working with my script? Because what you will see, I've put on the slide. You will see that, and it will just be a load of text. And you will not be able to move between one part of it and another part of it. And actually, it'll make your whole performance, it'll undermine your whole performance at that particular stage. It interferes with flexibility. It interferes with engagement, eye contact, pace, the tone of your performance. All of those things are undermined by using a script. So therefore, that safety net essentially unravels, becomes a piece of rope, wraps itself around your neck and strangles the life out of your performance. How do you get rid of that? Self-confidence. Trust yourself. Trust yourself to be able to do it. Use notes that work for you. Try headings, bullet points to guide you. That process of learning is all about actually the process of becoming a good advocate. But never think that you're going to get away with it, if you like, by reading from a script, because it will never work. So that's a really key piece of advice I give to all of you. And practice, practice, practice. In front of that iPhone, as I was saying, that really, really, really works. And anyone that you live with, if you go to bar school, I can promise you this, right? By the end of your year doing bar training, they'll still be saying, is there anything else? Have I still got to play the judge again? Have I got to play a witness again? Because you will be using those people to test and enhance your own skills. That's what you'll be doing. Could be mum, dad, brother, sister, partner, whoever it might be. Use them. That's great. Okay, because that's what you're going to be doing when you get to the bar. Not them. I mean talking about real people in real courts. You can let them off at that particular stage. Okay. Another important aspect, which is quite different from those of you who are doing law degrees now. I'm teaching you now about practical advocacy. So I'm looking at my phone just because I want to finish on time, that's all. The concept of avoiding being asked why. An argument, an effective submission, is made up of two key parts. The proposition, the headline, the point, if you like, and the support for that proposition. If you give the point that you're going to be making without actually giving the support for it, then it's not going to work. And I've just got a couple of examples, proposition plus support. They're simple examples, but I hope they will illustrate what I mean. So for those of you that have studied criminal law, you'll know that the mens rea, the mental element for the offence of murder, is either an intention to cause grievous bodily harm or alternatively to kill, one or the other. Whereas, it takes even barristers by surprise, the mens rea for attempted murder is an intention to kill. The intention to cause grievous bodily harm for attempted murder is not sufficient to amount to the offence of attempted murder. So what's the proposition? Just reading this out. In my submission, whilst an intention to cause grievous bodily harm would be sufficient for the full offence of murder, it is not sufficient intention for attempted murder. That's the proposition. Now, if you stop there, what's the judge going to ask? Why? How to stop the judge asking why? Support it. The support as set out in the case of Wybrow. 1951, 35 criminal appeal reports, page 141. Another piece of advice for you when you're doing moots, ask the judge if you can dispense with citations. It stops you having to do what I just did. And judges like it when you do that. They don't really want to hear citations all the time. You might want to go from that and take the judge to page 143 to the judgment of Lord Justice X, and then to page 147 to the judgment of Lady Justice X to further support the points that you're going to make. But you've given a proposition and you've justified that proposition with clear support. That is the approach to practical advocacy. Switch that round for a moment. Just imagine what it would be like if you did it the other way. My lady, could I please take you to the case of Wybrow? You'll find it in your bundle at page 2,543,000, blah, 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 blah. They open it. And then you say, and if I could turn you please to the second page of that case, and then you read out the judgment of Lord Justice X. And now if I could take you to the page, 2 further pages on, the judgment of Lady Justice Y, and you read it out. Throughout all of that time, you haven't actually set out why you're doing it. And the judge is going to be thinking, well, it's all well and good, Mr. Kessling, but why? What's the point? You're never going to have that if you start with the point, i.e. the proposition, and then you go to the support for that proposition. Another really simple example, using statute rather than case law. Proposition here, in my submission, the defendant cannot be convicted of the offence of using threatening behaviour under Section 4 of the Public Order Act for this reason. So you've actually there, there's a segue. You're saying that there's a reason. You're going to give that reason. What's the support? Because Section 4, subsection 2 of the Act provides that no offence is committed where the behaviour is used by a person inside a dwelling and the other person is also inside that or another dwelling, which you'll say, if it's the case, is precisely the factual situation in the case that we're dealing with. So again, proposition plus support. Please adopt that approach. Adopt it in your skeleton argument. This is the proposition we're putting, supported by this. It could be a regulation, it could be a statute, it could be a case, it could be a fact, supported by, depending on what the proposition is, by a fact within the brief. But set that out in a skeleton form because it's a skeleton argument. And then you're going to add flesh to that. But stick to that concept of proposition plus support. You'll go to, I always say to you, right, go to court as much as you can. If you happen to be in London, whether now or in due course, when all of you, as I know you will, apply to the Inns of Court College of Advocacy to do your bar course, come to the Royal Courts of Justice. You'll be here in the Inns of Court doing your training. Go to the Royal Courts of Justice. Watch good barristers. Except they won't all be good barristers because some of them won't adopt that process. And believe me, once you get it and you realise that this is a key to practical advocacy and you see it done the other way and you see the judge losing track because the judge isn't sure what the point is, then that really, really sticks out. And you think, now I understand why it works the way I've been taught and the way I'm used to doing it. Because I can tell you this, if I'm sitting there judging a moot and an advocate adopts the approach of a clearly, simply structured advocacy presentation where they're following this concept of proposition plus support, it's very difficult to actually ask them anything because everything they are submitting to me is perfectly well supported. How can I say why? I can't, because the answer's being given to me, and that is powerful advocacy, okay? So I was about to say, if there's one thing that I've said that's really important, that's it. That's not true. Really, this is a cumulative effect thing. It's the cumulative impact of all of these things that really makes a performance sing. Answering questions. That's always an issue for people. They think, oh, I'm going to be asked a question and I won't know the answer. Yes, you will, okay? Let me tell you this, it's very rare that people don't know the answer. And when they don't, there's always a simple reason. It's because they haven't done enough homework. They haven't done preparation. They don't know their case intimately and entirely. And if you do, it's not going to happen. But if you actually don't know the answer, then say, I'm very sorry, my lady. I'm afraid I can't assist with this point. May I move on to my second submission? Okay? Far better than trying to fudge it. Sometimes you may not understand the way the question has been asked of you. And there's nothing impolite as long as you say that politely. I do apologise. Would you mind asking the question in a slightly different way? That might be perfectly appropriate. Ask them to repeat the question if you perhaps missed part of it. Whatever you do, don't assume what the question is until you've heard it, because you may not mean it to be rude, but if you cut across someone when they're asking a question, believe me, it comes across as rude, and you don't want to wind the judge up, because that probably means you're not going to win the case. So that's quite helpful. Remember also in a moot, just because the law may not be on your side, you may feel you've got the weakest argument, doesn't mean you're not going to be the best performer in that moot. It's not judged according to whether you win on the law, it's judged according to how you perform. There's not a barrister who never loses a case. It doesn't happen, okay? Some cases you will win, and some cases you will lose. Don't try and fudge it. Don't pretend, don't just make it up. Don't say, oh, well, I'll deal with that later, because thinking the judge will forget. The judge won't forget, okay? They're like elephants in that sense. They never, ever forget, okay? So I hope that helps. And just the final thing. Some people get really defensive. You can see what I've got here on the screen. I see that in moots. It's like, how dare you ask me a question? It was all going so well until you interfered and asked me a question. Again, try to be helpful. Use your answers to advance your case. It makes a huge difference. I've dealt to some extent with arguments. Keep them simple, clear structure, proposition plus support. Keep your arguments down to the best arguments that you have. Keep it concise, keep it focused, and make that document look attractive. Don't fill it with so much text and tiny fonts that actually it just looks confusing, because if they look at that and think it's confusing, actually they'll think your submissions and your oral advocacy will be similarly confused, which actually they probably will. So it should demonstrate simplicity and clarity. A lot of people think in a mooting competition that the way to end is essentially to do a summing up of everything they've said, to repeat everything they've said. It's not. You do not need to repeat. I remember being shouted at as a junior barrister, Mr. Kessling, it doesn't make your submissions stronger by repeating them. I think I'd repeated it probably 3 times because I thought it was so good. I had to learn that lesson the hard way, okay? Don't learn the lesson the hard way. When you get to the end, stop. And there's a universal way of bringing your submissions to an end. Unless I can assist the court further, or unless I can assist you further, those are my submissions. Sit down, okay? Don't say, as a lecturer would, any questions? Because you don't want any more questions, frankly, do you? You've had enough already. Hopefully you haven't answered them like that. But that's the point. Don't invite them, just close down in that universally accepted way. And the final thing I'm going to say to you, because I can see John standing there, reminding me that actually I've got just a few minutes to wrap up. The final thing is nerves. It is nerve-wracking. Public speaking is right up there with things that people find scary. You know, some people are more worried about public speaking than they are about death itself. Seriously. So, let's not get that scared about public speaking. Like anything, you know, familiarity helps. The more you do it, the more you get used to it. But actually there's been a study, and this works, that if you think about it, that the feeling of being really scared about something is actually quite similar to the feeling of feeling really excited about something. And really it's about adrenaline. And you can reframe the way you think about nerves by saying to yourself, actually, I'm really excited about what I'm going to do. And so you should be. So you should be excited. Think about the amount of work. If you followed Dinah Rose KC's advice, and you know your case intimately and entirely, if you've looked at the facts, you've embedded them into your mind, you've looked at the law, you've worked out through careful and concise analysis how you're going to put this case forward, of course you should be excited, because this is your opportunity to stand there and present your case. And there is something that I call the invisible line in advocacy, and all of you, if you follow what I've said, will cross it, because it's that moment, you know it when it happens, it's that moment when you know this is working. This is working because actually I am now persuading the person, persuading the audience, persuading the person towards the case that I am presenting. And it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. And you will all have that, which, following my own advice, I'm not going to repeat anything I've said. I'm going to stop here. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.